Alright, so Bethesda has a Todd Howard problem. Yeah, that's certainly one way to put it. Though, okay, I guess we'll see. But is Todd Howard really the issue? Or is it kind of just the whole studio in general? Because how much can you put blame on one guy versus an entire organization that hires hundreds of people actively working directly to make games? Well, we'll find out. Bethesda has a hard tower problem by LegacyKillaHD. Let's go.
A number of years ago, Todd Howard sat down during the summertime with Jeff Keighley and talked about his vision for the Elder Scrolls 6. One of the core things that he brought up at the time was the need for the studio to have a technological leap that just wasn't available at the time for the Elder Scrolls 6. We saw some of that technological leap with Starfield, and in all honesty, it just isn't enough with what we're seeing from the industry nowadays. Bethesda, in many regards, has stagnated. The user reception with Starfield is a great indication of the dissatisfaction that many feel with.
I was kind of excited to play Starfield. Then the game came out. I heard how dog crap it was, and then I never got around to playing it. All I know about Starfield is that it is empty and repetitive and boring. That's all I know about Starfield. And probably will never ever play Starfield. And which is probably for the best.
Modern day Bethesda game studios, and also the feeling that we just keep on having releases that are a little bit like Skyrim. It's just Skyrim in many ways, the success of it, that's awesome. Great success for Bethesda. They keep
the game came out like 15 years ago. Yeah, it's time to let go.
Making it and such. That's always the funny story we talk about. But Bethesda keeps trying to duplicate that success, and they haven't really evolved their game formula, even their end.
You know what the game that has reminded me of Skyrim the most has been Elden Ring. Elden Ring is basically, now this is from like a Maxwell video, but the joke he made in Maxwell made in one of his Elden Ring videos was that Elden Ring was the Dark Souls of Skyrim. And he's right. Elden Ring is Skyrim 2.0. That's what Elden Ring is. If you want to try to figure out how to make the next Skyrim, well, you really should be trying to figure out how to make the next Elden Ring.
Engine hasn't really evolved that much, and that has been to the ire of a lot of the gaming community. While we see other developers doing laps around them, there just seems to be a lot of excuses for Bethesda, their style of an RPG, which at this point feels ancient. And the blame is largely on Todd Howard and his design philosophy. He is the main guy at Bethesda, and
he's short. What a short king, holy shit. How tall is he? Man, he's short.
Of the blame. But also, I think the big problem with Todd Howard is all the yes men around him, and I think that indication came very clearly the last couple of months, especially after Shattered Space, which was a god-awful DLC expansion, and one of the lead design directors, Emilio Pagliarulo, he went on the defensive for Bethesda, and was just trying to argue that
it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but what is? As Starfield's Shattered Space launches, Bethesda reflects on the importance of players speaking their mind. Are they going to listen, though, if players speak their minds?
No, this game's not everybody's cup of tea, but I just feel like that dismisses a lot of the complaints that people have had about Starfield and Bethesda for the longest time. And I think a lot of what we've seen from Bethesda and some of the top brass the last couple of years is just a lot of those defensive.
How funny how disconnected some players are from realities of game development, and yet they speak with complete authority. I mean, I can't guess what it takes to make a hostess Twinkie. But I don't work in the factory, so what the hell do I really know? Not a lot. Well, what I do know is when a product is shit. If I eat a Twinkie and I don't like the Twinkie, I can tell you that the Twinkie is not that good and I don't want it. That is what you're supposed to be listening to. It's your job to make a good game. It's my job to tell you how I feel about that game.
Comments and not really taking accountability for how they have stagnated in terms of their quality. So we've seen Todd Howard. He's talked about some
Looks
of their
like Fallout.
Elder Scrolls 6. This is a great example of it.
Look at this.
So we've seen
this game looks like I'm just playing Fallout. Fallout. But I imagine it's not nearly as cool as the Fallout world.
Howard, he's talked about some of their ambition with the Elder Scrolls 6. This is a great example of it. He talked about this last year, saying that he wants it to be the ultimate fantasy world simulator.
It won't be.
And I think people just really want there to be a proper evolution. Because if
It won't
this is
be.
just more Skyrim, I think there's going to be immense disappointment. People
There
want
will
to see
be.
an evolution of what Bethesda has been, and the Elder Scrolls
If you want Skyrim 2.0, just play Elden Ring.
6, the gap between Skyrim to that game is going to be about 15 or so years. This needs to be something that is grand. It needs to be monumental. And in this current form, especially with what we've seen Bethesda producing the last couple of years, there's just no indication that they can deliver that anymore. Now, we've also seen Todd Howard again. This is what I mean. We just hear a lot of excuses and a lot of defensive comments. He talked about this earlier this year. It was a couple of months ago, around the time Shattered Space released. He said that their games are irresponsibly large. We cut very little from our
games. Yeah, that is the issue. You need to make the game smaller. I mean, I understand you want to be Skyrim, and yeah, Elden Ring is really big world. But it's a very small world because of the level design. The level design, yeah, it's a wide open world, but most of it's empty. It's just traversing. The actual cool parts, the cool levels in Elden Ring, are very small locations. You walk into a building and it's like a castle, but there's not a castle around every corner, unlike where it was in Skyrim, where there was a castle around every corner. In Elden Ring, there is no castles around every corner, and if there is, it's usually a destroyed small castle with a few enemies at it.
Our games, which in hindsight, that's just not exactly something that is great to hear, especially because it feels like almost quantity over quality, and that really was a core tenet with Starfield's design. 1,000 planets, you can go everywhere pretty much.
Too much.
Except the problem is that a lot of the quality content is so far apart that it just creates an experience that isn't cohesive enough.
Exactly.
Pretty much a lot of the mistakes that
should have been like 30 planets. That's more than enough planets to explore, and then slowly add a planet or two with DLC or a free update. No, maybe with the DLC you just add like 5 to 10 extra planets that you can explore. Or maybe like an asteroid belt.
They made with Fallout 4 with like Radiant quests, they just brought it into a bigger scale with Starfield. Now, earlier on in the year, when Starfield's reception started to turn a little bit more sour, I do think it has turned a lot more sour because of games like Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk 2077.
Such a good game.
Experiences that have released.
See, Cyberpunk is a lot smaller world than like Skyrim, but it feels so much more dense because so much detail is placed into that world. And that's where Cyberpunk very much succeeds in, is the immersion of making you feel in that like you're in that world, and therefore making the world feel a lot bigger than it actually is.
Right alongside some of these expansions and Starfield's base game experience, and just put Bethesda in a negative light. It's like I said, the competition, when you have other RPGs, role-playing experiences that look so much better and they play so much better, people are going to compare. They're going to make notes about Bethesda up against that competition. But Todd Howard in May said this: he reckons he knows why Starfield was so divisive. It was too different than you've seen from us in past. And again,
oh man, does he have that backwards? It's too similar.
These are the defensive.
It's too similar to what it was in the
past. Starfield, Fallout 76, a lot of the mistakes that they made with
haven't played that one.
Todd Howard and his top brass at Bethesda put a lot of the blame on just the bugs, but it was the design philosophy day one that a lot of people took issue with. Obviously, Fallout 76 has turned it around, but you still can't rewrite how the game began.
That dragon?
But Howard said about Starfield, this was in May, on the Kind of Funny podcast, we see a lot of players saying, this is why I want out of a Bethesda game, which is to explore a world in a certain way, and Starfield didn't give me that. I prefer the way it's done in Fallout or Elder Scrolls. And although Howard thinks that's perfectly understandable, he says it's just not the experience Starfield sets out to provide. But the problem is that Starfield in many regards is just grabbing a lot of the gameplay elements from Elder Scrolls and Fallout and bringing it into this new franchise, and it just does not work. And I think that
because it lacks the world building and, most importantly, the nostalgia that ultimately part of the reason why Fallout 3 and Skyrim did so well was because it had that build up to that world. Okay, because you were It already had a history attached to it. But well, they tried to take that entire. They tried to fast track that history with Starfield, and then they realized, well, guess what? Starfield isn't as interesting as the world of Fallout or the world of Elder Scrolls, and then has the weak gameplay added onto it. Well, who wants to play it?
That's a big complaint that a lot of people have been bringing up, and Todd Howard just doesn't at all acknowledge any of this, and all of Bethesda has not acknowledged this. He says, I do think for us,
like Mass
particularly
Effect.
me, going into a science fiction game, I want to be able to land on all the planets. I want the game to say yes to us, knowing that the content is going to be different than you've seen from us in the past. And then even more recently, after Shattered Space, we got an explanation through Phil Spencer about how Todd Howard felt about the reception towards Shattered Space. Again, a universally hated DLC expansion, probably some of the worst content that Bethesda has ever put out.
Oh, of course, it got a 7 out of 10 from IGN. 7 out of 10 IGN. Oh, that's putting it up there with Black Myth Wukong and I think Dragon Age the Veilguard. Wow. Yeah, IGN continuing destroying their credibility.
And Todd Howard pretty much said that it was just the buggy's fault for why it was so negative.
Oh,
Spencer, in an interview
really?
with GameFile, brought up a conversation that Phil had with Todd Howard about Shattered Space. Todd and I were talking about Shattered Space. Starfield is a game I put a ton of hours into, blah, 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 blah. And he goes on to mention about Howard. I think some of the feedback on the expansion is, we wanted more features. And Todd's like, well, should we have waited to put buggies out? The Bethesda had figured keeping the vehicle for the DLC could have helped fleshed it out more and I guess garnered a better reception.
But
again, the core complaints with Shattered Space had nothing.
I mean, just look at this. It's a wide open world full of nothing. I mean, I look around at face value. I just see a bunch of desert. I see one building. Probably can't even enter that building. And I just see some point on the screen that I'm supposed to get to. But there's nothing in between. Yeah, you have like some oil wells here, but do they do anything? No. I imagine they don't do anything. It's no different from having a tree or a rock. It doesn't do anything, so it's just an empty world, and there's nothing there. So why bother even having an open world if it's just going to be empty? It's about density. And that's what a game like Cyberpunk does really well. Elden Ring, it's pretty empty. But Elden Ring manages to make it better because when you get to the actual locations, they're really cool. Like the actual level design, like Stormvale Castle, is pretty cool. Same thing with the capital city.
Really to do with the vehicle, the land buggy. It was more so with the quality of the content, which was terrible. It was lackluster. Spencer continued, and so I think you're trying to tune.
Looks like bad Mass Effect, honestly.
To the expansion. I think
looks like the original Mass Effect 1.
there will always be a balance to managing the game month to month, but not every game will do expansions. And the big thing about the buggy is it was introduced, but the games, these planets and everything weren't designed around it. So it at times just feels extremely awkward to use. And it was also, the buggy was buggy in of itself on,
should just made it a hover vehicle.
Expansion map that was introduced
like in Mass Effect 2.
Space. So in many ways, it just does not work that well. There's just so many issues with the things that Todd Howard has brought up and the excuses that they've had for, why the reception with Starfield and its expansion has been negative. And
seems like he just refuses to take responsibility. In extension, the rest of Bethesda staff refuses to take responsibility for the failures and the lack of innovation. Maybe they just need new blood in it. Because we can criticize them all we want, but are they actually going to change their behavior? How do you actually bring change into Bethesda Studios? Well, you gotta bring in new people. Simple as that. Because clearly, Bethesda hasn't changed in the last 10 to 15 years. I mean, this still looks like Fallout 4. Fallout 4 came out over 10 years ago. It should not play and look like Fallout 4. Simple as that.
He is not alone with this. We've seen Emil Pagliarulo, the design director at Bethesda, pretty much saying the same thing. That's why I'm saying there's a lot of yes men around Todd. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but what is? Emil said in this interview that was done around the time Shattered Space released that Bethesda was proud of Starfield. They also said
Oh
Shattered
my
Space,
gosh.
again, was something that they're extremely proud of, and they considered themselves as one of the best DLC makers in this industry. And maybe that was true 10 or so years ago, but again.
Yeah, Shadow of the Erdtree called. They want your claims back, because clearly From Software knows how to make a good DLC.
And other developers have done laps around them, especially CD Projekt Red.
Oh,
I guess
yeah,
one
Phantom
big
Liberty.
thing that irks me about modern day Bethesda is
Blood
how
and Wine.
reliant they just are on Todd Howard. He is viewed as the god, the guy that calls all of the shots. And I think it does raise the question, can Bethesda exist without Todd Howard? And I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Yeah,
Maybe
obviously. It's a company. He's one guy.
Move past the hurdles that they
I
currently.
mean, it's Todd Howard. He's not Tony Stark. It's not like he is the company. Or Elon Musk, but I imagine Elon Musk's companies could probably do pretty well without Elon Musk as well.
Face. We've seen interviews, some life pieces about Todd in which they call him the Christopher Nolan of gaming. He's a larger than life figure.
Yeah, he wishes.
He is the face of Bethesda Game Studios, something that has been the case for the last decade or so.
You want Christopher Nolan? Go ask Miyazaki or Kojima. Those are some real Christopher Nolans of gaming.
Issues, everything, he is the one who's going to face that blame. And that's why I bring him up, and that's why I do say Todd Howard he's a Bethesda problem. He is the problem that we currently face. And I do think that you can look to a lot of the interviews and a lot of the things we're about to go over as evidence of that. We had this piece that came a couple of years ago. This was around the time Fallout 76 was an absolute disaster.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Fallout 76's disastrous launch. Kotaku talked to a number of developers that worked on
That's
Fallout 76.
why I never played Fallout 76.
A lot of the red flags about how Todd Howard's management style with that game was a disaster. They mentioned a lot here, but a couple of the excerpts from this piece that I really wanted to point out was this one. According to one source, Todd Howard was supposed to be in charge of the game, but he spent most of his time working on Starfield, which reportedly started development after Fallout 4 shipped in 2015.
Oh my gosh.
Starfield was Todd Howard's baby. He's made that.
Here's my opinion. Fallout New Vegas was one of the best Bethesda published games in the last 15 years. That was because it was not Bethesda didn't actually make the game. They got an actual RPG studio to make the game. All Bethesda did was create the engine and the items and stuff for the most part. They just used the Fallout 3 engine to make Fallout New Vegas. That's why Fallout New Vegas was so good, because they outsourced the actual game creation to a better company instead of doing it in-house. Because is it a coincidence that all the in-house Bethesda games kind of suck, but every time they send it off to a third party, like Obsidian with Fallout New Vegas, it's a fantastic game and arguably one of the best games in the entire franchise, if not the best? Is that just a coincidence?
Quite clear. One source told Kotaku that his subordinates would call it seagulling when he would fly by later and shit all over an idea that had popular traction within the design team.
Oh, it sounds like Elon Musk.
Howard was a decent executive producer, albeit one with a bigger is better design philosophy.
Oh.
We've seen how that, has hurt Bethesda in recent
Yeah.
years. Another excerpt talking about his management style, the more single-player focused main studio at Rockville, which Todd oversees, was the most favored, most profitable studio within the ZeniMax portfolio, and developers from Austin felt resentful that the main studio seemed to undervalue the multiplayer expertise that they'd built on projects like Battlecry, canceled online action game. The friction between Maryland
I have
and
no idea what
studios
Battlecry
is very real. This is what this report brought up at the
Never
time.
heard of it.
One of the major criticisms of 76 was that it launched with no NPCs to interact with.
You serious?
Though there were some senior level concerns about technical challenges, almost none of the Bethesda designers wanted the game to launch without NPCs. Executive producer Todd Howard was not willing to budge all the way up till launch, and obviously the feedback that he got from players, which was just obvious, but people wanted a Fallout experience in their Fallout game. And yes,
they didn't have NPCs at the launch of Fallout 76. Are you serious? What the hell were they thinking? Seriously, what were they thinking? What, that all the players would interact with each other and they all get along, sing Kumbaya? Have they never played an MMO? They have Elder Scrolls Online. So they should know how an MMO works. You know what? The less I talk about it, the less I'll be confused about it. The less I say, the less I'll be confused.
That involves human NPCs. But again,
Yeah.
it is Todd's way or the highway, it seems. And just to understand how involved Todd Howard is in everything that Bethesda does, former Elder Scrolls dev, this was one of the lead developers on Skyrim, said Todd Howard would sometimes work on 24 projects at once.
What?
And is the face of Bethesda partly because he's incredibly photogenic, which I truly do believe.
Gosh.
I mean, he's been that way for the last 15 or so years. And Bruce Nesmith said that Bethesda's head of publishing, Pete Hines, who retired recently.
All right, I see that. Nowadays, we know Howard is involved in some capacity with a bunch of different projects, including, but not limited to, Elder Scrolls 6, Starfield, Fallout 76, the Fallout TV show, and Bethesda's Indiana Jones game. Alright, here's a word of advice to Todd Howard. Knock that down to 2 and maybe an advisory role on a 3rd. So, Elder Scrolls 6 and he seems to like Starfield, but you probably should just cut ties with that. So we'll just go Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout TV show. And then be an advisory role on Bethesda's Indiana Jones game. They should just cut ties with Starfield and Fallout 76. But knowing Todd Howard, he's not going to do any of that.
Has made no bones about the fact that when he took over the marketing, Bethesda needed a face. They needed a person for the audience, for the customers, the fans to identify. Having an entire crew doesn't work well. You needed someone who is that guy, and Todd made a very natural choice for that. He's incredibly photogenic. He's amazing in person and in interviews and on stage. So
basically, he's an extrovert surrounded by a bunch of introverts that don't know how to talk to people and to have social skills. So therefore, he is naturally charismatic, and therefore he gets higher charismatic roles, and his speech skill is a lot higher than everybody else. So they just choose him to do all the talking, and he gets to choose the dialogue options. That seems to be what I'm reading and hearing here. And he was the boss of the dev team at the time, so he becomes that role. Nesmith also mentioned that near the end of his tenure, Howard would have somewhere around 24 projects on his plate at once, some small, some large. There's mobile games, there's remote things that he's just has to look at, in addition to a variety of larger projects. Just get someone else to do that.
Which almost seems like, Todd's being spread too thin. Howard isn't leaving Bethesda anytime soon. He's still fairly young and quite vital, and I think we have many more years before we have to worry ourselves with Todd Howard not making games. Nesmith said. Probably no 15. Bruce Nesmith told gonna be 2030 something. He initially proposed that the space role-playing game only have around 24 systems instead of the 120 it ended up with, which is something that a lot of people have brought up, since Starfield's release, saying that it would have been a lot smarter. The point was made quite legitimately that once you've done one solar system, doing 100 is really not adding to your work all that much, he said. And then he continued saying that Todd pretty much pulled the number 100 for the number of star systems out of thin air. But the more we went on, the more it was like, okay, core activity takes place in these 24 in the settle system region, and the rest of it is open space. But people love our big games. They love that open area to explore, so let's go ahead and let them have it. So, although that's explore it, but there's nothing to explore. Come on, Todd. You should know that. You ever seen the project? You should know there's nothing to explore. It's just a lot of walking simulator. Misconception of what people actually love about a Bethesda. In this case, Starfield flying. And then it went down to, okay, how do we make exploration meaningful? And once again, you have to succeed on one planet. Once you've got that formula, you have the formula for all the planets. And I do think that this is clear indication that there was obviously some conversation about how to handle planets, the 1,000 planets, early development with this game, but obviously it's Todd's way or the highway. And then we even heard this opinion pretty much said by another developer, a former Bethesda lead artist, talked about this. And this is Nate Perkipile. He worked at Bethesda for 14 years. He was a lead artist on 76 and a number of other Bethesda. And worked on other titles including Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and Skyrim. So he's from the golden age. And he's saying that things have gotten too big. Bigger's better, except when it's not. And we're clearly seeing that it's not at this moment. Experiences over the years. He said, I know a lot of people have thoughts on Starfield and how it is probably too big, should have been smaller, etc. I agree.
Yes, it should have been like 30 planets, if that, 20 to 30 planets, and you can explore them all. And maybe throw in like a few space stations here and there, and a moon or an asteroid belt or something, and then call it a day. And then just flesh all that out.
Agree with a lot of that. And while I enjoyed working at Bethesda a lot when we were about 65 to 110 people on Fallout 3 and Skyrim, I enjoyed
the
it
good
a
old
lot
days.
less when we kept growing and growing. But getting back to Bruce Nesmith's remarks, because he's said a lot the last year or two, which I think is really eye-opening about the behind-the-scenes that has been happening at Bethesda for the last so many years. Nesmith talked about some of the role-playing choices of Bethesda experiences and the constraints that they have because they want to give players everything. He compared it actually to Baldur's Gate 3. He said at Bethesda, the games we were making were so big we had to take the approach of everybody's got to be able to do this at some point. We can't block off content that way. You can see it in our games. We
awful
don't.
idea.
You can get to the heads of all the guilds. You can be friends with all the companions. You can go to all the places. Nothing is off limits. But when you play Baldur's Gate 3, you get the impression, rightly so, that this decision I'm about to make will close off parts of the game and open up others, and it's meaningful. That means something.
It also adds replayability value. So yeah, you play one way, like I'm going to use Fallout New Vegas as an example, because I am quite familiar with Fallout New Vegas. You can do NCR. Well, that cuts off Legion and a bunch of factions. Well, vice versa, you can do Legion. Well, that cuts off NCR and a bunch of other factions. So right off the bat, you have the first half of the game is pretty similar, but then the second half of the game is completely different. So you are incentivized to play through the game twice. But then there's different ways that you can play the game, different builds you can do. So maybe you can even have a third way where, I like playing the NCR way, the NCR path, but I want to try a different build. Well, then that's a third playthrough. And then that's not even including that there's a Mr. House path and Independent Vegas. So that's a fourth playthrough. 4 playthroughs. You know how many hours you can get out of that game? I can tell you this, it's way over 200.
And again, Bethesda, Todd Howard's design philosophy is immense player freedom. And I guess player freedom is just letting players have access to every and anything on one playthrough, which I do think hurts a role-playing experience. But Smith, a couple of months ago in an interview with Kiwi Talks, actually had more to say about, again, Todd Howard and his design philosophy and some of the things he does behind the scenes. He specifically said this about Todd.
Boy.
His time and resource must be spread so thin.
Yeah. That's probably an understatement.
He wants to be able to have his hands in everything, but that's not humanly possible. So you end up with a situation where some things get very lightly touched, and then the things he cares mostly about
is a delegation problem.
Yeah, we saw that. Starfield is his baby, and, well, look at the reception that it's garnered. But, yeah, he's working on Indiana Jones. He just wrapped that up. He's worked on Starfield.
Oh, is that game done?
Space. There was the Elder...
Wait, did the Indiana Jones game came out, actually, right? I think it did. Huh. So you should have a lot more time, then. Hopefully he will use it wisely.
Elder Scrolls Castles mobile game. There's rumors that an Oblivion remake has been in development. The Fallout TV show. And then there's obviously also Fallout 76, the Elder Scrolls 6. And what other unannounced projects that we don't know of? Todd's been busy and almost seems like it's too much.
When you've got 400 people under your belt,
you should either just Bethesda should either cut some of these projects like Fallout 76 and Starfield loose and just say, screw it. Game's dead, we're done with it. Or, and this is probably the better idea, they should just send it to a third party and have a third party handle it. A third party that actually knows what they're doing to make a specific type of game, like a MMO type game, like how Fallout 76 is supposed to be.
Yeah, well, what are you going to do? Spend 3/4 of the day talking to each of them that wants to talk to you?
Yeah.
Or do you have mid-level and higher-level managers who can take that responsibility?
Exactly, that's what I just said.
That for you.
Delegation.
So that you can get on with the more important work of directing the overall project.
It's management 101 and an extension, even leadership 101. How you lead your team is by choosing sub-leaders that can lead the team in a more specific and better direction. It's just why it's a massive ship. Yeah, the captain of a battleship yeah, he's the leader, but then he has all his sub-officers that can do and control and command all his subordinates. You know, the guy that's in charge of the engine room, the guy in charge of the weapons, you know, weapons officer, guy in charge of navigation. Yeah, the captain can't do all of that, so he or she has to delegate to all the subordinates and choose leaders to take control of the situation.
See, when I spoke to Jonah, he said to me that the day when Todd rides off into the sunset, there's going to be a lot of stumbling and staggering within the company as to who can replace him.
Yay.
Well, he's
Skyrim
throughout his entire career in this letting go process. I mean, if what I said earlier is he had a light touch on everything and then deep dives into things he wanted.
Yeah.
That's a light touch literally on everything. Which means that one of the issues that the studio struggled with occasionally was, well, we can't move forward because Todd hasn't had a chance to look at it.
That's just insane to me. It truly is. A studio with 400 to 500 developers, they're all just reliant on Todd Howard. And it hasn't always been that way. I understand the comparisons you're going to have like Kojima and some of the other auteurs in the video game industry. But I feel like Bethesda is a little bit different. There was a time before Todd. He isn't like the go-to guy at this company. I feel like he shouldn't be, but maybe he is.
Now, obviously,
he literally just took the words right out of my mouth. I completely 100% agree with everything he just said. Couldn't have said it better myself.
See, this wasn't something that was, completely a blocker because the games got produced on time.
Yeah.
Which is not a common thing to happen in the industry to, have it done excellently and have it done on time.
Not be like Assassin's Creed Shadows and get pushed back like, what? Has it been 2 times now? Are they on their 3rd? I honestly forget. Game keeps getting pushed back. At least you're not Ubisoft, but that's a low bar to clear.
It does mean that when he leaves, they're going to feel it. But I could also name you half a dozen other people that when they leave, the company's going to feel it. Maybe not to the level of Todd, but they're going to feel it.
And just to continue,
it'll probably be a good thing, though.
But here's another example of it. Again, another interview with Nesmith, Skyrim's retired lead designer, says anything other than the Bethesda usual has to be approved by Todd Howard. He doesn't believe it's true, but unfortunately, it's true. Specifically, Nesmith said, all decisions run through Todd. Todd would hate for me saying that because he doesn't believe it's true, but unfortunately it's true. If you want to have anything different other than the Bethesda usual on some particular aspect, or you have something else you want to propose, it's somehow got to get in front of him. Again.
So it's about access, and those who have access to Todd Howard, i.e. the higher management, probably a bunch of yes men. And that's why I imagine what the issue is that you need to get into Todd Howard's circle, but the only way to get into Todd Howard's circle is by being a yes man to Todd Howard. Is that what the issue is here? Is that he's surrounded by yes men to the point where he doesn't know how to actively constructively criticize his own decision-making skills and game design and planning and whatnot? I think that seems to be what the issue is here.
Again, 400 to 500 developers. It will give him credit. He has tried really, really hard not to be the last say guy, but it hasn't worked out that way.
Yeah.
It's not something he wants intellectually. I think it ends up being that way because he's somebody who has opinions and whose opinions are valuable. Again, he is Bethesda Todd.
So yeah, it pretty much seems like it's structural slash systemic issues with how Bethesda itself is currently set up and managed.
Howard has an attribute that none of the rest of us did. He has always put himself into the seat of our everyday player. He always was able to see it from Joe Average player's perspective.
What happened to that? Has he just stopped playing video games in general then? Or is he only playing these games, Bethesda games, and doesn't play anything else? Because the average Joe does not like Starfield. The average Joe does not like Fallout 76. The average Joe is not really that excited for Elder Scrolls 6. I'm just telling the truth. So what happened? Maybe you should just play Elden Ring and then he'll Elden Ring, Cyberpunk, and Red Dead Redemption 2. Play those 3 games and learn from them, and I'm sure Todd Howard would be perfectly fine then.
I just don't believe that anymore. I mean, maybe that was the case 10 or so years ago.
Yeah.
But I think we're living in the past at this point. Again, you get this. Look at 33% positive reviews. 30% overall. 3,000 reviews with a Shattered Space expansion that most people ignored. There was this dissatisfaction. If Todd was able to put his, shoes in everybody, the average gamer, he would understand that this expansion was not going to go over well. But we have heard the counter in all these interviews that Bethesda's actually proud of what they did here, and I just take
they shouldn't be
issue with that. And it's massive red flags going off, especially with the Elder Scrolls 6 looming. People need to start having these conversations, and they're
if Elder Scrolls 6 does come out, it's going to be one of the biggest disappointment of the decade. Calling it right now.
Needs to be accountability. We're just not seeing that at all. And Nesmith did tell MinMax that Bethesda's growth in the COVID pandemic really revealed the weaknesses of its Howard-centric decision-making. You think? You didn't get to interact with
it grew?
That at all. And Nesmith did tell MinMax that Bethesda's growth in the COVID pandemic really revealed the weaknesses.
How? It grew? How did Bethesda grow? When literally everyone else was falling apart and laying off employees like there was no tomorrow. Also, I see 36 lessons of Vivek. Who? Vivek.
Of its Howard-centric
That's the Vivek I'm thinking of.
Making you think. You didn't get to interact with Todd as much anymore. Said Nesmith of Bethesda's recent history. When you're running 6 different studios and if you got a dozen projects, although usually only one really big one going on at the time, he's only one man. He doesn't have the face time to do that anymore. And then he brought up an excerpt of another developer and just a very interesting thing about Todd Howard and his management style. Something I think about a lot is the oral history of Morrowind over Polygon, in which concept artist and writer and the guy behind the wonderful 36 Lessons of Vivek, Michael Kirkbride, tells a story about getting weird ideas past Howard. Kirkbride wanted to fill Morrowind with strange monsters, but knew anything too out there would scare off his boss, so what he did was draw 2 versions of every monster, the one that was weird and the one that was fucking crazy, and show Howard the second one get rejected and then come back with the first, which would invariably be accepted into the game simply because it seems so much more normal by comparison, which is...
It's like bartering, You offer a price way higher than you're willing to pay for, knowing that it'll get shot down. So then, when it gets shot down, and you go down to the lower price, that's the actual price that you want to pay for it.
Just a truly insane thing, and PC Gamer makes probably the right assessment that probably wouldn't get by Todd anymore, or they wouldn't probably.
Yeah, probably not.
Just very interesting history lesson with how Howard used to go about things, and I guess how people used to get things past Howard. And I do kind of love this comment. It was about a year ago, but I do kind of feel like it's a little bit accurate. This is invariably what happens given enough time. Howard has been rewarded for progressively stripping away complexity from the series he touches, and it's made him a monolith, especially within Bethesda. Starfield is one of the blandest, safest space games I've ever played. It's the natural progression from the Tolkienization of the Elder Scrolls, starting with Oblivion, to the oversimplification of dialogue in Fallout 4.
Yeah. Pretty much right on the nose. Right on the nose. Oh, the oversimplification of dialogue in Fallout 4. Oh my gosh. Only having 4 dialogue options for every conversation. Why? Who thought that was a good idea? Was that a Todd Howard idea? Did he just play Mass Effect and he was like, oh boy, gotta copy that, but not have nearly as much an interesting complexity to the dialogue system as that game had? Is that what happened?
How I wish Kirkbride stayed with Bethesda. Yeah, like I said, these complaints, these criticisms of Todd Howard and how Bethesda has been going about this has been going on for a lot longer than I think most people expect or understand. Like, I think it is really important to understand that this is Starfield up against a number of other RPGs, and it's just badly underperforming.
All right, let's look at this data real quick. So Starfield is the light blue line. Fallout 4 is in the dumpster. Starfield. So Baldur's Gate 3 and Cyberpunk are just outselling and out with about people playing. Fallout 4 and Starfield combined. Now, Fallout 4 makes a lot more sense. And because that game came out a while ago, but the Elder Scrolls 5 Skyrim still has a lot of players playing, even though that game came out how long ago? What was it, 2011? Yeah, it still has so many players playing. I wonder what that means. Actually, it probably has to do a lot more with nostalgia and then the modding community, now that I think about it. Because you go back to play Skyrim now, it's boring. It really is boring. Because there's so many games that does what Skyrim does, but better. Like Elden Ring.
Again, I just think this says a lot about Bethesda's current design philosophy and the holes and the issues with it. I mean, like, look, Fallout 4, 12,000 players, Skyrim, 22,000, and Starfield's barely got about 4.
Yeah, Skyrim has more players. The game that came out, a special edition, came out in 2016. The original game came out in 2011. Skyrim has more active players than Starfield and Fallout 4 combined. And then you combine Fallout 4, Starfield, and Skyrim together, and they still have less players active than Cyberpunk 2077. And Cyberpunk 2077 had a notoriously awful awful launch. Yet, they made a good game. Yeah, it was a bad launch, but it was a good game, and then they fixed it and kept adding stuff to it, and now look at it. It has more players than 3 AAA games. Yeah, granted, some of these AAA games are old, but the fact of the matter is they're still up there, still top tier.
So 1,000, and this is only a couple of months after their big new expansion, and it just fell flat. And then obviously against some of the biggest RPGs in recent years. This is what I mean about other developers doing laps around Bethesda. We're seeing, Larian, CD Projekt Red, and probably other developers we're not talking.
Just bring up Elden Ring. I want to see those Elden Ring numbers.
About. They're doing laps around this studio. Their level of quality and attention from the gaming audience has now surpassed Bethesda, which is falling behind. And let us not play a game of revisionist history, because this was the goal with Starfield, for it to have the lasting power of Skyrim. And at this point,
really?
It just doesn't look like it at all is going to pan out.
Yeah, it kind of missed.
Scroll 6 approach.
Just a little bit.
I think the many remarks made from Nesmith, including some that seem to indicate Bethesda doesn't see the flaws of their game engine, is alarming. Keep updating it will fix the many issues players have with what feels janky and dated. Sure, we'll see, I suppose. I just don't get the sense that there's any...
Wait. Lead Skyrim designer argues that Bethesda's primeval creation engine is perfectly tuned to studio's needs, so an Unreal switcheroo probably isn't in the cards. You serious? Who thought that? Just make a new engine. But you know what? I don't know why. I'm just gonna shut up, because I'm just getting frustrated now.
Dated? Sure. We'll see, I suppose. I just don't get the sense that there's any accountability coming from Todd or his team. They've
so
said they are open
janky.
to criticism, but the comments that they've made the last year feel defensive and like poor excuses. Starfield was a dream.
So that's why it looks like Fallout 4. Because it's the same engine as Fallout 4, the game that came out like 10 years ago. Now, when did this game come out? 2023? Okay. Still, that's 28. That's 8 years ago. Why are you using an engine that is from a game 8 years ago? What are you, some kind of indie developer? Why? Just why? Why would you think that's a good idea?
IP for this studio, and they can say it's right up there with Fallout and the Elder Scrolls, but it's just not. It's not even up there with The Expanse, which I think really set the bar for what Bethesda was even trying to go for. The level of interest really does indicate, how people feel about
fire
stuff.
graphics.
The fact that it's not at all in Steam's bestsellers list this year indicates that, especially when Baldur's Gate 3 is right up there at the top. It feels like they've been living off the high of Skyrim since 2011 on
Skyrim was too good.
Unwilling to do something big and drastic.
If Fallout New Vegas sold better and was more popular than Skyrim, then things would have been so much different. Because then Bethesda might have realized that they should just get third-party developers who actually make their games. And they should just stay on the technical side of things. Just do the technical part. When it comes to the actual game design, level design, and all that, just have a third-party studio do it.
And scary to improve, which has instilled fear in a lot of fans that the Elder Scrolls 6 won't be worth the wait. Skyrim was revolutionary for its time, and there's nothing about the creation engine 2.0 or writing of the past few games that makes me believe this follow-up experience fans will have waited likely 16 years for will be in this same breath. And if that does in fact happen, I still question if we'll see any accountability from Todd Howard and his Bethesda team.
No, he'll blame something else.
As well as a big fan of these games,
he's going to blame the current industry and the gaming industry and the gaming market. That's what he's going to do. He's going to say, oh, we didn't do anything wrong. It was just we put the game out at the wrong time and it wasn't the right conditions. Mark my words. Read my lips.
So I, of course, will hope for the best, but I also am a realist, in the sense that I see the writing on the wall. And whether you like it or not, Todd Howard is the face of this company. And when they fail, he gets the brunt of the blame. And there's been a lot of failure lately, so this truly does feel like a make-or-break moment for Todd, and I do hope he proves us all wrong. But even the problem with that perspective is that I've been saying that since 2015, and this last decade has just been a lot of letdowns. Anyway, what do you make of the modern Bethesda, Todd Howard? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative.
Pretty good video. You know my thoughts. It's been a disaster. What are we going to do though? Just keep complaining. Eventually we'll get through their thick skulls. Until then, we can only pray.